Assalamu alaikum friends, I am Areeb Rashid and welcome to the Scientific Miracles of Quran episode 2. In this episode I'll prove the origin of life of animals through Quran. Let's begin. I'll repeat the same verse of the Quran, the same surah and the same verse of the Quran that I said in my last episode. So let's begin. In Quran Surah Anbiya, chapter number 21, verse number 30, which says, أَوَلَمْ يَرَ الَّذِينَ كَفَرُوا أَنَّ السَّمَاوَاتِ وَالْأَرْضَ كَانَتَا رَتْقًا فَفَتَقْنَاهُمَا وَجَعَلْنَا مِنَ الْمَاءِ كُلَّ شَيْءٍ حَيٍّ أَفَلَا يُؤْمِنُونَ. This means, let me translate it. Do the unbelievers not realize that the heavens and the earth used to be one solid mass that we exploded into existence, and from water we made all living things? Will they believe? This is the same verse that I mentioned in my last episode, but this time I won't focus on the upper part of the verse. I'll focus on the lower part of the verse, because I already explained everything about the upper part of the verse. You can watch the episode. In this episode I'll focus on the lower part of this verse, which says, and from water we made all living things. Will they believe? This basically refers to the origin of life of animals. The Quran is referring to the origin of life of animals 1400 years ago. So 1400 years ago, when no one believed that every single animal is made from water, every single thing, every single animal is evolved from water, no one believed 1400 years ago. Because in 1859, Charles Darwin published a book which says on the origin of species. Its book refers to. Even only Charles Darwin discovered the origin of species of the every animal. So how can a human 1400 years ago in the 7th century can say that and we made every living thing from water? How can a human say 1400 years ago when Charles Darwin itself discovered in 1859? He published the book on the origin of species in 1859, and then later, after 1859, people got to know that every single animal is evolved from the water, from a single ancestor. Charles Darwin explains that every single animal is evolved from a single ancestor, microorganisms. But Quran says 1400 years ago about it. So how can a human more than a millennium before, say that and we made every living thing from water, when Charles Darwin itself he published in 1859 a book which refers to the origin of species. So how can a human a millennium before Charles Darwin was born can say that and we made living things from water? How can a human say 1400 years ago about this? If you ask any scientist around the world who discovered the origin of species, every scientist, maybe most of normal people like me knows that Charles Darwin is the discoverer of the origin of species, because he published this book in 1859 and no one knew before that. But why is there a more than 1 millennium gap between Charles Darwin and Quran, referring to the same thing? how can like why is there more than 1000 years gap between Charles Darwin and Quran? And both are referring to the same thing. There is a 1 millennium or more than a 1 millennium gap between Charles Darwin and Quran, referring to the same thing. Why is there a more than 1 million? Why is there more than a 1000-year gap between Charles Darwin and Quran? Because if the Quran was a human-written book, then there wouldn't be a 1000-year gap between Charles Darwin and Quran. Because right after Charles Darwin discovered this theory, then like only 20 to 30 years later, many scientists already accepted it. But Quran, why is there a 1000-year gap? Because when a human discovers or invents anything, then there is no 1000-year gap. Can you find any scientist, any scientist who discovered something or who invented something 1400 years ago, but the scientists accepted in this around only 200 years ago? There is no 1000-year gap between that, because human can't discover, because there cannot be a 1000-year gap between us, one scientist discovering something, and then after 1000 years the people will accept that. That's why there is 1000-year gap, because the Quran is the word of God. So let me explain in the details about what Charles Darwin said. So in his book on the origin of species, he mentioned that every living thing around the world, every living animal around the world every living animal around the world evolved from one species, one single ancestor, from one microorganism in the ocean. Ocean 3.7 to 4.5 billion years ago. Around 4.4 to 3.7 billion years ago, the first life form formed. So they say that the life formed, no, those stromatolites were formed from microorganisms. So the stromatolites are from which the microorganisms were. So from a single organism, microorganism, from a single cell, everything was evolved. To this every animal was evolved from those single ancestor, from a single cell in the ocean 3.7 to 4.4 billion years ago. So the Quran is referring to this same thing 1400 years ago, when Charles Darwin itself discovered in 1859. How can a human say 1400 years ago exact same thing? This is a proven scientific fact from Quran 1400 years ago. So a human cannot say that. That doesn't make sense. A human cannot, because if a human say that, then there wouldn't be a 1000-year gap between Charles Darwin and Quran. That's a proven fact, because if you ask anyone, any scientist who discovered the origin of species, every scientist will say Charles Darwin. I think you also know who Charles Darwin is. He is the discoverer of the origin of species. But now, how can a human say 1400 years ago in the Quran mentioning the same thing? Did Charles Darwin live 1400 years ago? Of course not. He lived only around in 150 to 200 years ago. That's it. How can a human say 1400 years ago the same thing? That every living thing is made from water. The Quran is referring to every animals which we see are evolved from water, from a single microorganism. So 3.7 billion years ago. So how can a human say? So of course a human cannot say, because it's clearly the word of God. Because Charles Darwin is the proof. Charles Darwin proved itself that the Quran is the word of God. Because Charles Darwin came to this earth to prove the origin of species. That's why he was born. He born to prove the origin of species. So the coming of Charles Darwin in this world proves that the Quran is the word of God. It's no doubt that Quran is the word of God, and the origin of life was discovered in around 1850s and was published by Charles Darwin in 1859. But Quran is mentioning 1400 years ago that we made every living thing from water. So every single life, every single species of animals which we see, every animals we see around were evolved from a single species in water 3.7 billion years ago, and from a single cell, from a single microorganism, and it evolved, got an opposite skin. Then dinosaurs came, reptiles. Reptiles, amphibians, everything. So many animals, T-Rex, small. Smilodon, Tehanoboa. Many snakes, every species, every animal species is evolved from a single cell in ocean 3.7 to 4.4 billion years ago. And this is the same thing mentioned in Quran 1400 years ago, when Charles Darwin explained this thing in 1859. When Charles Darwin itself discovered this in 1859, how can a human say 1400 years ago this same thing? Of course a human cannot say, It's clearly from God. So there's no doubt that Quran is the word of God, and Charles Darwin was the discoverer of the origin of species. And because of Charles Darwin, we all know that Quran, it proves that Quran is the word of God. So yeah. So every living thing, every living animal is evolved from a single cell in water, from a single microorganism in water, 3.7 to 4.4 billion years ago. And this is and Quran proved. So I've proved that Quran is the word of God. I've proved that the Quran mentioned the origin of life before Charles Darwin was even born. Like way before, more than 1 millennium before, Quran already mentions this 1400 years ago about the origin of life. When Charles Darwin was only born 200 years ago, around 200 or 200 years ago, around that time. And Quran proves that the Quran is the word of God. I proved that. So I'll see you in my next episode of the Scientific Miracles of Quran. Thanks for watching.